Morning, everyone. We are from Group 6. Today, we will talk about regional economic integration and a case of global food prices. My name is Nadia Feranisa, and I will begin today's presentation. These are the table of contents of today's presentation. And the first one is about level of economic integration. Before we continue to know about level of economic integration, we will refresh you about the regional economic integration. So the definition is an agreement among countries in geographic region to reduce and remove tariff and non-tariff barriers to the free flow of goods, services, and factors of production between each country. So these agreements are designed to promote free trade within regions because it believes that it can produce gains from trade for all member countries. And for the pros, just like I've said before, because it removes all barriers to doing business across borders for all member countries, some countries integrate with each other. And for the contrast, there is an opinion that said it might lead to a world in which regional trade blocks compete against each other. Next, about level of economic integration. So there are several levels of economic integration. We will start from the smallest circle. It is free trade area. So it means that all barriers to trade of goods and services among member countries are removed. But each country is still allowed to determine its own trade policies with regard to non-members. The example of it is European Free Trade Area, or we call it as EFTA. So, in free trade areas, there are no discriminatory tariffs, quotas, subsidies, or any other administrative impediments to distort the trade between countries. Okay. The next level is customs unions. So this union eliminates trade barriers between member countries. And the new thing is they adopt a common external trade policy. So this common external trade policy is considered necessary to give significant administrative machinery to oversee trade relations with non-members. European Union used to be in the form of customs union. Okay. The example of customs union is the Andean community. The next level, a common market. So a common market has no barriers to trade, includes a common trade policy, and it allows a production to move freely between members. So the labor and capital are free to move because there are no restrictions on immigration and cross-border flows of capital between member countries. To establish a common market, of course, there should be harmonized effort to integrate with each other. The example of it is Mercosur. Economic union. So this involves free flow of products and factors of production between member countries, adoption of common external trade policy, a common currency, and harmonization of member states' rates, also a common monetary and fiscal policy. And European Union is the example of it too. It is not really perfectly implemented because not all countries adopt euro as their currency, and there are still differences in tax and some rates. Next, the political union. So this is the highest level of economic integration, that it's not, they don't only regulate the economic, the trade policy in there, but they also involve all the social and foreign policy of the member states. So the example is still European Union because they have the Council of Ministers that consists of government ministers from each European Union members. These are controlling decision-making body of the European Union. And next, the case for regional integration. So the first one, the economic case for integration. In economic point of view, countries integrate to gain from free trade and investment and make an ideal agreement with other countries to set common rules about international trade. So there is incentive and make the same common agreement that can benefit all the member countries. But why make it regional? So basically, it is easier to establish a free trade and investment agreement among a limited number of countries because it is only in one region. The political case for integration. In political point of view, countries integrate to reduce potential of violent conflict and enhance their political weight in the world. The example of it after World War II, yeah, European countries are not large enough to hold their own in the world markets and politics, so they need to integrate. Okay, they also need to integrate due to facing Cold War with the United States and Soviet Union. And then some impediments to integrations. There are two main reasons why integration is not easy to achieve. First, integration has costs. Yeah. There are some groups that might lose from a free trade agreement as there will be any painful adjustments when moving to free trade. For example, establishment of NAFTA in 1994, there are some Canadian and US workers, especially in textile industry, that lost their jobs because they moved the factory to Mexico to get cheaper labor. The workers in US and Canada lost their job. Or in our case, it might be because Asian Economic Society, like workers from Vietnam, Thailand to work in Indonesia, and the graduates in here should compete with them to get the job. Okay, the second impediment to integration is concerns over national sovereignty. So economic integration demands that countries give up some degree of control. That means the countries should adjust their policy, like the fiscal, the tax, the trade policy, to follow the union. Just like having a common currency that requires countries to relinquish control of the monetary policy. And this can explain why Britain wants to leave the European Union because they want more freedom.
Alright, we will continue to the next parts of the presentation. My name is Rizky Adrian Sijabat, and I'm going to continue my parts of the presentation for chapter 9. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the case against regional integration. Now, although regional free trade agreements is beneficial, some economists have expressed concern that the benefits of regional integration have been oversold, while the costs have often been ignored. The benefits of regional integration are determined by the extent of trade creation as opposed to trade diversion. Then, what is trade creation and trade diversion? Trade creation occurs when high-cost domestic producers are replaced by low-cost producers within the free trade area. It may also occur when higher-cost external producers are replaced by lower-cost external producers also within the free trade area. Then, trade diversion occurs when lower-cost external suppliers are replaced by higher-cost suppliers within the free trade area. A regional free trade agreement will benefit the world only if the amount of trade it creates exceeds the amount it diverts. Okay, we will continue to the next part. I'm going to talk about regional economic integration in Europe. Now, Europe has two trade blocs, which are European Union and the European Free Trade Association. European Union is by far the more significant, not just in terms of membership, but also in terms of economic and political influence in the world economy. The first thing I want to share is the evolution of the European Union. The European Union, or EU, is the product of two political factors, which are the devastation of Western Europe during two world wars and the desire for a lasting peace. And the second one is the European nations' desire to hold their own on the world political and economic stage. Throughout the year, European Union had changed its name from European Coal and Steel Community, and then changed to European Community, and finally to European Union. We will start with European Coal and Steel Community. The European Coal and Steel Community was formed in 1951 by Belgium, France, West Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. The objective of this community is to remove barriers to intra-group shipments of coal, iron, steel, and scrap metal. Now, with the signing of the Treaty of Rome in 1957, European Coal and Steel Community was changed into European Community. The Treaty of Rome provided for the creation of a common market. Some things that are in the treaty are: the first one is the elimination of internal trade barriers and the creation of common external tariff. The treaty is also requiring member states to abolish obstacles to the free movement of factors of production among the members. The treaty also provided for any necessary harmonization of the member states' laws to facilitate the free movement of goods, services, and factors of production. Lastly, the Treaty of Rome also committed the European Community to establish common policies in agriculture and transportation. The name later changed in 1994 to European Union, following the ratification of Maastricht Treaty, that will be discussed later on. Now, throughout the year, many European countries joined the Union, as we can see from the diagram here. Many countries joined from 1973 until 2007. Now, the next thing I would like to share is the political structure of the European Union. The economic policies of the European Union are formulated and implemented by a complex and still evolving political structure. The four main institutions in this structure are the European Commission, the Council of the European Union, the European Parliament, and the Court of Justice. First, I will share about the European Commission. The European Commission is responsible for proposing European Union legislation, implementing it, and monitoring compliance with European Union laws by member states. The European Commission is run by a group of commissioners appointed by each member country for a 5-year renewable terms. The president of commission is chosen by member states, and the president then chooses other member in consultation with the states. The commissioners also reviews proposed mergers and acquisition to make sure they do not create a dominant enterprise with substantial market power. The entire commission has to be approved by the European Parliament before it can begin to work. The commission has a monopoly in proposing European Union legislation. The commission makes a proposal which goes to the Council of the European Union and then to the European Parliament. The Council cannot legislate without a Commission proposal in front of it. The Commission is also responsible for implementing aspects of European Union law, although in practice, much of this must be delegated to member states. Another responsibility of the Commission is to monitor member states to make sure they are complying with the European Union laws. In this policing role, the Commission will normally ask a state to comply with any European Union laws that are being broken. If this persuasion is not sufficient, the Commission can refer a case to the Court of Justice. The next one I will talk about the European Council. European Council is the ultimate controlling authority within the European Union, since draft legislation from the Commission can become European Union law only if the Council agrees. The European Council is composed of one representative from the government of each member state, depending on the issues discussed. For example, when agricultural issues are being discussed, the agriculture minister from each state attend council meetings. Or, for another example, when transportation is being discussed, transportation ministers attend the meeting. Before 1993, all council issues had to be decided by unanimous agreement between member states. This often led to marathon council sessions and a failure to make progress or reach agreement on Commission proposals. In an attempt to clear the resulting logjams, the Single European Act is established. Now the Single European Act will be discussed later on. Now we continue to the European Parliament. The European Parliament debates legislation proposed by the Commission and forwarded to it by the Council. It is primarily a consultative rather than a legislative body. European parliaments can also propose amendments to a legislation. There was a debate about whether a council or parliament the European Council or the European Parliament should be the most powerful body in the European Union. This led to the Treaty of Lisbon. Under this treaty, the power of the Parliament is then increased. The last one is Court of Justice. Court of Justice is the supreme appeals court for the European Union law. Like commissioners, the judges are required to act as independent officials rather than as a representative of the national interest. The commission or a member country can bring other member to the court for failing to meet treaty obligations. Similarly, member countries, companies, or institutions can bring the commission or council to the court for failure to act according to an European Union treaty. Now I will talk about the Single European Act. The Single European Act was born of a frustration among members that the community was not living up to its promise. By the early 1980s, it was clear that the European community had fallen short for its objective to remove barriers to the free flow of trade and investment between member countries, and also to harmonize the wide range of technical and legal standards for doing business. With all these problems, the European community responded by creating the Delors Commission. Under the chairmanship of Jacques Delors, the Commission proposed that all impediments to the formation of a single market be eliminated by December 31st, 1992. The result was the Single European Act, which was independently ratified by the parliaments of each member country and became European Community Law in 1987. The Single European Act has some objective or propose some changes, which are, the first one is to remove all frontier controls between European Community countries, thereby abolishing delays and reducing the resources required for complying with trade bureaucracy. The second one is to apply the principle of mutual recognition to product standards. A standard developed in one European Community country should be accepted in another, provided it meets basic requirements in such manner as healthy and safety. The third one is open public procurement to non-national suppliers, reducing costs directly by allowing lower-cost suppliers into national economies, and indirectly by forcing national suppliers to compete. The next one is to lift barriers to competition in the retail, banking, and insurance business, which should drive down the cost of financial services, including borrowing, throughout the European Community. The next one is to remove all restriction on foreign exchange transaction between member countries by the end of 1992. And the last one is to abolish restriction on sabotage, which is the right of foreign travelers to pick up and deliver goods within another member state's borders by the end of 1992. Some estimates suggested this would reduce the cost of haulage within the European Community by 10 to 15%. To signify the importance of Single European Act, the European Community also decided to change its name to the European Union once the Act took effect. The Single European Act has had a significant impact on the European Union economy. The Act provided the impetus of the restructuring of substantial sections of European industry. Many firms have shifted from national to pan-European production and distribution system in an attempt to realize scale economies and better compete in a single market. And lastly, the impacts of the Single European Act is having a faster economic growth. The results have included faster economic growth that than would otherwise have been the case. Okay, this is the end of my part of the presentation. Now we'll continue with the next part of the chapter, which will be shared by my friend.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to tell you about the establishment of Euro and also the enlargement of the European Union. It started in 1991, where the European countries members signed a treaty of the Maastricht Treaty. It committed them to adopt a common currency by January 1st in 1991. Therefore, the euro is now being used by 17 of the 27 member states in the European Union. These 17 states are members of what is often referred to as the Eurozone. It encompasses 330 million European Union citizens, and it includes the powerful economics of Germany and also France. Many of the countries that joined the European Union on May 1st, 2004, and the two that joined in 2007 will adopt the euro when they fulfill certain economic criteria, a high degree of price stability, and a sound fiscal situation. Also, stable exchange rates. Now, the establishment of euro has rightly been described as an amazing political feat with few historical precedents. Establishing the euro required participating national governments not only to give up their own currency, but also to give up the control over the monetary policy. Therefore, the government do not routinely sacrifice their national sovereignty for the greater good, indicating the importance that the European attach to the euro. By adopting the euro, the EU has created the second most widely traded currency in the world, and after that of the US dollars. And some believe that ultimately the euro could come to rival the dollar as the most important currency in the world. Now, three long-term EU members like Great Britain, Sweden are still sitting in the sidelines. The countries agreeing to the euro locked their exchange rates against each other in January 1st, 1999. Euro notes and coins were not actually issued until January 1st, 2002, and in the interim national currency circulated in each of the 12 countries. However, in each participating state, the national currency stood for a defined amount of euros. After January 1st, 2002, euro notes and coins were issued and the national currency were taken out of the circulation. By mid 2002, all prices and routine economic transaction within the Eurozone were in euros. Now, there's also the benefits and also the cost of euro. Europeans decided to establish a single currency in the European Union for a number of reasons. First, they believe that the business and individual will realize significant savings from having to handle one currency rather than many. Now, to elaborate, these savings come from lower foreign exchange and hedging costs. For example, people going from Germany to France no longer have to pay a commission to a bank to change their German Dutch marks into French francs. Instead, they are able to use euros. Now, second, also, they perhaps more importantly, the adoption of common currency make it easier to compare prices across Europe. This has been increasing competition between uh, because it has become easier for the consumer to shop around. The third one is faced with lower prices. European producers have been forced to look for ways to reduce their production costs to maintain their profit margins also. Their introduction of common currency by increasing competition has produced long-run gains in the economic efficiency of European companies. Also, the fourth one, the introduction of a common currency has given a boost to the development of highly liquid pan-European capital market. Now, there are also some drawbacks, which is the cost of the, the nation that use euro. For instance, they lost a control over national monetary policy. Now, to elaborate, for some, a single currency is that national authorities have lost control over it. Thus, it is crucial to ensure that the EU monetary policy is well managed. The Maastricht Treaty called for establishment of an independent European Central Bank, which is ECB. It is basically like a U.S. Federal Reserve. It has a clear mandate to manage a monetary policy so as to ensure price stability. Among other things, the ECB set interest rate and determines monetary policy across the Eurozone. In an optimal currency area, similarities in an underlying structure of economic activity make it feasible to adopt a single currency and use a single exchange rate as an instrument of macroeconomic policy. Now, this is not very optimal because EU has a very diverse countries. For instance, in an optimal currency area, the underlying structure of economic make it feasible to adopt a single currency, right? Now, however, there's some very dissimilar things between the nations. For example, Finland and Portugal have different wage rates, tax regimes, and also they have a different business cycles. They may react very differently to the external economic shocks. A change of euro exchange rate that helps Finland may hurt Portugal. So there's some benefits and also all the also cost by nation that using euros. So now I'm going to tell you about the enlargement of European Union. Now there's many countries have applied for EU membership. This has started by the end of 90s. At least 13 countries had applied to become the EU members. Now to qualify EU members, like I said before, the applicants had to privatize state assets, deregulate markets, and restructure their industry. Also, they have to tame the inflation. They also have to enshrine complex EU laws into their own system, establish stable democratic governments, and respect human rights. This is the underlying word. In December 2002, the EU formally agreed to accept the applicants of 10 countries, and they started to join in 2004. Left standing at the door is Turkey, actually. Now, Turkey has long lobbied to join the Union. It presents the EU with some difficult issues. The country has had a customs union with the EU since 1995, and it's about half of its international trade is already with the European Union. However, full membership has been denied because of concern of human rights issue, particularly Turkish policies toward the Kurdish minorities. This is a very important issues for the EU. Now, in addition, some of the Turk side suspect that the EU not eager to let primarily Muslim nation of 66 million, which has one foot in Asia, join the European Union. Now, so there's some conflict of you know thoughts from the EU and also of the Turkish government. Now, the EU formally indicated in December 2002 that it would allow the Turkish application to proceed with no further delay in 2004 if the country improve its human rights record to the satisfaction of the EU. So this is the enlargement of European Union. Next will be given by my friend.
My name is Widi, and now we will discuss about the regional economic integration in Americas. The first one is the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, which is a free trade agreement between the US, Canada, and Mexico. It is said to be the most significant attempt to integrate the Americas regional economics. It was initiated by the US and Canada in 1988, where they agreed to enter into a free trade agreement which took effect on January 1, 1989. They agreed to eliminate all tariffs on bilateral trade between their countries by 1998. Later in 1991, Mexico joined them and aimed at establishing the North America Free Trade Agreement. In January 1, 1994, the agreement became law. NAFTA contents include the following, which we'd like to highlight are: abolition by 2004 of tariffs on 99% of goods traded between Mexico, Canada, and the US, removal of the most barriers on the cross-border flow of services, removal of most restriction on foreign direct investment with some exception, application of national environmental standards, and the establishment of two commissions with the power to impose fines for those who didn't comply with the standards. By the establishment of NAFTA, there are pros and cons towards them. Proponents of NAFTA have argued that the free trade area should be viewed as an opportunity to create an enlarged and more efficient productive base for the entire region. Mexico also have a lower labor cost so that some US and Canadian firms would move their production there. Consequently, Mexico will benefit from much needed inward investment and employment. The US and Canada would benefit as well because they could export more goods and services to Mexico since Mexicans' incomes are increased. Those who opposed NAFTA stated that this agreement would be followed by a mass exodus of jobs from the US and Canada into Mexico because of the lower labor cost there. But the big amount of the job loss in the US said to be such an impossible scenario, economists repeatedly stressed that NAFTA would have a small impact on both Canada and the US. The next contrast that falling trade barriers would expose Mexican firms to highly efficient US and Canadian competitors because the competitors had far greater capital resources, access to highly educated and skilled workforces, and much greater technological sophistication. However, in the long run, Mexican firms could gain in the efficiency as they adjust to a more competitive market. Next, the environmentalists also voiced their concern about NAFTA and point out that with NAFTA, chemical waste and sewage would increase along the river's course from El Paso, Texas to the Gulf of Mexico. There was also counterclaim from those who fear a loss of national sovereignty in Mexico. They believe US firms would not really contribute to Mexico's economic growth, but instead would take advantages from Mexico's low-cost resources. And then the results of NAFTA establishment can be seen in trade, labor productivity, and political side. NAFTA overall impact has been small but positive. From 1993 to 2005, trade between NAFTA's partners grew by 250%, and Canada and Mexico are now the number 1 and 2 trade partners of US, implied that NAFTA regional economic have become more closely integrated. For labor productivity, there was 50% increase in Mexico labor productivity since 1993, even though the employment effect of NAFTA have been small. The political effect of NAFTA significantly felt by Mexico, where Mexico has been becoming a stable democratic nation with a steady economic growth. For the enlargement of NAFTA seems like it will unlikely to happen in the near future, even though a number of other Latin American countries have a desire to join. The US Congress have a political opposition to expand NAFTA, but they make a bilateral trade pact with Chile instead. The next regional economic attempt in America is the Andean Community, consists of Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, and Venezuela. It was initiated in 1969 by the creation of Andean Pact, which included internal tariff reduction program, common external tariff, transportation policy, and common industrial policy. Then in 1980, Andean Pact had collapsed and failed because most of its members tend towards the radical socialist political systems. And in 1997, the Andean Community finally established in Galapagos Island with the Declaration of Free Trade Area, customs unions, and the common market. The Andean Community now operates as a custom union, and by 2003 they signed agreement with Mercosur on the creation of a free trade area between them. Later in 2006, Venezuela withdrew from the Andean Community to join the Mercosur. Next, we will talk about the Mercosur itself, which originated in 1988 as a free trade pact between Brazil and Argentina, which aimed to reduce tariff and quotas in both countries' trade. Then in 1990, Uruguay and Paraguay joined, and in 2005, Venezuela also joined. Some results of the Mercosur aim, which is being a full free trade area and a common market, are the quadrupled trade between 4 member countries and the growth of 4 member countries' GDP. However, there are critics from senior economics of World Bank Alexander Yates toward Mercosur. According to Yates, the trade diversion effects of Mercosur outweigh its trade creation effects. They are producing the fastest growing items inefficiently and make a protection for outside competition to enter. Thus, once the trade barriers fall, Mercosur countries may not be able to compete globally. Mercosur faced their downside when in 1988 their member countries slipped into recession that made trade slumped. In 1999, Brazilian real was devalued and make it harder for other Mercosur countries to trade with that largest export market. Then in 2001, Argentina facing economic stresses and suggested to temporarily suspend the customs union. In 2003, new Brazilian President Lula da Silva announced his support for a revitalized and expanded Mercosur, but until 2011 little progress had been made in moving Mercosur down that road. The regional economic integration also happened in the Central America. The first one is the Central America Common Market, which established in the early 1990s by Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua, but later collapsed in 1969 when war broke out between Honduras and El Salvador because of soccer match. Then in 2005, Central America Free Trade Agreement or CAFTA established between 6 countries and the US. The aim is to lower the barriers between them for most goods and services that are being traded. There is also Caribbean Community or CARICOM, which is a custom union created in 1991 between English-speaking Caribbean countries. They were facing failure 3 times consecutively in attempt to integrate their regional economy until in early 2006, 6 CARICOM members established the Caribbean Single Market and Economy or CSME. Finally, there is actually an initiative to make a free trade area of the Americas in 1994 at a Summit of the Americas. In 1998, inaugurated talks held to discuss about FTAA establishment in January 1, 2005, but that has never been happened because of some reasons. US and Brazil, as the largest economies in the North and South America, has never been achieved an agreement. US want its southern neighbors to tougher enforcement of intellectual property and lower manufacturing tariffs, but those southern neighbors didn't seem to be eager to embrace. On the other side, Brazil and Argentina want the United States to reduce its subsidies to the US agricultural producers and scrap tariffs on agricultural imports, which the US government doesn't seem inclined to do. And then in 2005, Venezuela President Hugo Chavez condemned the US free trade model will only take benefits from poor people in Latin America but won't give any advantages for them. So it is unlikely for FTAA to be established in the near future because of that poor progress in achieving an agreement.
Okay, good morning, Mrs. Mutia and class. Now I'm here. My name is Alfian Aristi Pratama, and I'm going to talk about regional economic integration elsewhere. Continue the presentation. So first of all, I'm going to talk about Association of Southeast Asian Nation or ASEAN. ASEAN was established on 1967 when Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand assembled in Bangkok. Then Brunei, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, and Cambodia joined recently. On 2019, grouping of 649.1 million people with a combined GDP of some 9.34 trillion US dollar. So ASEAN is a quite big region. Then the ASEAN contents are an ASEAN Free Trade Area or AFTA among the 6 original members of ASEAN came into full effect. Then the AFTA has cut tariffs on manufacturing and agricultural products to less than 5%. But Malaysia wanted to protect Proton, an efficient local car maker, from foreign competition. Not only Malaysia, but Philippines also has refused to lower tariff rates on petrochemicals and rice, the largest agricultural product in the region. So you can see that some countries still want to protect the domestic market, so the AFTA still cannot apply perfectly. Then the last, ASEAN signed a free trade agreement with China that removes tariffs on 90% of traded goods. This went into effect January 1, 2010. So ASEAN have an agreement with big countries, with China, to support their economy, which is the AFTA also. Then we move to regional trade blocs in Africa. In 2001, in early 2001, when Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, member states of the East African Community or EAC, committed themselves to relaunching their bloc 24 years after it collapsed. So, what's the Africa contents? Nominally, there are now 70 trade blocs on the African continent, and many countries are members of more than one group. So it's quite different than the other regions. Significant political turmoil in several African nations has persistently impeded any meaningful progress. So we know that political turmoil was trouble in Africa, so they can't to have a good economic environment. Then 26 African nations signed an agreement pledging to work together to establish a free trade area that would remove or reduce many tariffs and eliminate time-consuming custom provisions between them, known as Three-Party Free Trade Area or TFTA. They are TFTA, the good reconciliation among countries. Yeah, it's quite big. There are 26 African nations. Then now, the FTA grouping of 630.1 million people in Africa with a combined GDP of some 1.2 trillion US dollar. So yeah, uh, it's a good progress for Africa to have a community that established as it's still growing to a bigger GDP. Then we move to other trade agreements. Following the failure of the Doha round of talks to extend the WTO, the United States and many other nations have placed renewed emphasis on bilateral and multilateral trade agreement. So there are some agreements that specifically are bilateral and multilateral trade agreements. Maybe in it's for countries that in the different region. So in 2009, under President Obama, the United States was pursuing two major multilateral trade agreements versus the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, with 11 other Pacific Rim countries, including Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, and China, and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP, with the European Union. It's the policy from the United States under President Obama to emphasize their economy with bilateral and multilateral trade agreements. However, on 2017, President Trump, who appears to be opposed to free trade, pulled the United States out of the TPP. In theory, the TTIP is still in negotiation. However, given the tenure of the Trump administration, it seems unlikely that this will progress. So yeah, it's so normal when there are different policies or perspectives from different president in a big country like America. So we move to another topics, which is education for managers. Education for managers. Regional economic integration has created significant opportunities, also presents a number of threats. There are opportunity and threat of regional integration. The opportunities such as grow the market and lower factor costs. And second, free movement of goods and services across borders, harmonized product standards, and simplified tax regimes. So yeah, we know that regional economic integration have opportunities. Of course, a free trade area is good to grow the market and lower factor costs, and free movement of goods and services that's very good. But also, regional economic have traits there. The business environment has become more competitive. Yeah, the effect of it's getting easier to grow the market with a lower factor cost. Yeah, it's more competitive to countries or to company to compete each other. Then trading blocks arises from the likely long-term improvement in the competitive position of many firms within the areas. Yeah, we know that such as ASEAN or GFTA or NAFTA and so on, there will be Yeah, quite a problem for Japanese. They are not included in uh, the community, so it will be more competitive of many firms. So yeah, thank you. That's for me.
We're going to talk about the case study and the case overview. As you can see, the last 25 years, food prices have been falling, and in its peak in 2007, global food rise until its peak. As you can see the graph, this is 2007, where the red dot is indicating why this has happened. Why this happens because there is two major countries with the most high population that increase in its population and demand for consumption, food consumption. Thus, because the food consumption increases, the meat consumption also increases. Because the farmer needs to give or breed the cattle with grains to give their food, the grain also increases, thus making the global food prices. As you can see, the formula is 1 kilogram of meat will equal to 8 kilogram of grains. And the second one is because US and EU adopted policies to increase production of ethanol as raw material of biofuel. These policies includes subsidies for production. Yet, on the other hand, US and EU apply policies to shut down substitute of biofuel alternative, sugarcane, with high tariff policy. Why do I give this picture? Because US and European Union apply high tariffs for other countries who want to import sugarcane to its country. And one of the most impacted countries is Brazil, because Brazil is the production leader for sugarcane. Seeing this matter or tackling this matter, Brazil reported it to World Trade Organization or WTO that EU and US use subsidies for the production of its alternatives of biofuel, and it is corn and also soybeans, thus making these three countries in very high competition in biofuel sector. And as you can see, the overview of the case, there's two big problems that happens. The first one is the scarcity in global food resources, because this is, as I said, because of China and India that increase in population. And the second one is the unhealthy competition between a few countries in the biofuel sector, and it is the European Union, US, and also Brazil. And I'll answer the question one, who will be benefit but with the production of ethanol, and who will suffer from the production of ethanol. First, we need to know why US and European Union want to promote ethanol, because ethanol is one of the material that will slow down global warming. Because if you know that 97% of gasoline in America is embedded with 10% of ethanol, that hence will result in more oxygenate emissions. And as you can see, on the other hand, if ethanol is produced, companies and farmers will make new industry and will help push new markets and bring more money to its because of the demand for ethanol. But on the other hand, from this policy, who will suffer the most is particularly the consumers and the industry who produces sugarcane. As you can see, Brazil is one of the most impacted country because it's the second largest producer of sugarcane. But it will be even more dangerous for the consumers because the effect is more massive. And as you can see, if the price of corn sugarcane increase, the, it will have that effect on grocery bills, and also the farmers who even buy the corn and sugar cane for its cattle to feed their cattle will have fail in budget.
My name is Tubagus Rifki Hanif, and now I'd like to explain and answer the second and third question. So the second question is talking about the downside effect of biofuel. The case is that if food prices rise by 1/3, it will reduce living standard in rich countries by 3% and in poor countries by 20%, a huge difference. And a research suggests that if there is no change in policies, we need to emphasize this. If there is no change in policies, cereal price will increase by 10 to 20%, and this will reduce calorie intake by 2 to 8% in many world poorer nations. So the question is, what should rich countries do? So we think that there should be a change in policy. The reason for this is, first, up until July 2020, the number of chronic starving people worldwide has increased to 690 million. Knowing that production of biofuel decrease food supply and drive price high, this is a very serious matter. Second, as there is already a better alternative for biofuel material rather than corn, which is sugarcane, developed countries really have little to no reason on imposing tariffs and tax, and tariffs should be cut and tariff on sugarcane should be cut and sugarcane should be used. And the third, based on John Ziegler findings, the amount of corn needed to fill an SUV equals to 1 year of corn supply to feed one person in, say, Mexico or Zambia, where the basic staple is corn. And fourth, growing crops for biofuel reduce the availability of land for food. So our recommendation is to revise biofuel rules to accelerate climate change, discuss with all impacted countries to develop solutions, and reduce tariffs on biofuels and reduce tariffs on sugarcane biofuels and break subsidies for corn biofuels and research for better quality fuels. Now let's move to the third question. So the third question talks about ethanol or biofuel as a more environment-friendly alternative or fuel. Or is it? Government use the arguments that as ethanol result in lower CO2 emissions, therefore it's more friendly to the environment. But if we accept that global warming itself is a serious problem, should we encourage the government? What are the arguments and what is the best policy? Our answer to those questions is to not encourage government to use ethanol. Encourage on better alternative. Why? Because sometimes we see things from a narrow perspective, and in ethanol or biofuel case, it may be true that as a fuel results in lower CO2 emissions in comparison to gasoline. But the total effect on corn ethanol is worse than gasoline fuel. This came from the loss of lands that double the carbon emissions in comparison to gasoline. And we noticed that it's quite difficult to search for alternatives since this type of fuel is used worldwide. So our recommendation is for producing country is to increase research for better alternatives and to commit to find better alternatives. One study found that butanol as a viable alternative since it has higher energy content and lower solubility in water. And that's all from our group. Thank you for your attention, and we apologize if there are any mistakes or whatsoever in our presentation.